Good afternoon. Hi, thank you for coming. This is the 7th event for the Native Narrative Speaker Series. This series of panel discussions, programs, and presentations are part of the Here, Now, and Always exhibit. The exhibit has 7 areas of concentration: cycles, ancestors, home and community, trade and exchange, language and song, survival and resilience, and art. Each of the Native Narrative Speaker Series will be connected to one of these areas. I want to acknowledge and thank Edward and Maria Gale, the Gale Family Foundation, for this generous support of this lecture series. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Julie O'Keefe. Julie is from the Osage Nation and grew up in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. She attended Oklahoma State University and has been a program manager and community developer for over 20 years. She was a consultant for the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City and produced culturally appropriate product lines and worked with over 200 artists from the 39 tribal nations in Oklahoma. She served as an art consultant and has served on many boards and committees, including the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, Center for Craft, and 3 terms on the Osage Nation Foundation. She was the lead Osage wardrobe consultant on the Oscar-nominated movie Killers of the Flower Moon. Please welcome Julie O'Keefe. Thank you. Thank you. So I do want to clarify, Julie is not related to Catherine O'Keefe, who this theater is named after, or I should say, nor is she related to Georgia O'Keefe.
I can be. Give me a glass of wine. I've got a whole story about how she left me all the art in Ghost Ranch.
Right. So first of all, congratulations on the nominations for Killers of the Flower Moon. We all had thought that there would be a better outcome, but we do understand, how those things work out. But we're also really proud of the movie being nominated and just getting out there and for everyone to see. So that was hugely, hugely important. So thank you for that. So let me start with the questions. Can you tell us how this position came your way, how you started and got involved?
Well, the position became available actually during COVID. And so what happened is in 2019, I'm going to go back to when the book came out and the rights were bought. They were actually purchased by a group out of Dallas who, a friend of mine, Chad Renfro, who's the ambassador to the film, happened to be out in LA at a show house. He's an interior designer, a well-known one. And he is Osage and my brother. And so he basically happened to be out there and heard that this story, the rights were going to be sold for a movie and that Paramount was looking at it. And this friend of his, they were sitting by a swimming pool, says to him, oh, you're Osage, aren't you? Well, why don't you, I've got this friend who bought the rights to the book. He lives down in Dallas. This company's called Imperative. And he said, I'd like to talk to that friend of yours. So he just dials up the phone. Hant says, hey, I've got a buddy here named Chad Renfro, who's Osage, who would like to talk to you. Chad ends up taking that call and convincing those men that bought this story, which is a producer named Bradley Thomas, and also a man named John Atwood. And he comes and sets up a dinner, which is how, of course, natives, this is how we welcome people in. And this is how we sit down and honor you. And our chief had this dinner, and we invite these gentlemen in, and they have a meeting with them. And so they said, we're not really sure how this is going to go, but we hear that Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio are looking for a project, and that they may be interested in doing this. And so that's when Chief basically said, we would be interested in having them come to our reservation. We will find a way for them to shoot here, what is ever available, and take you to the original locations where a lot of these people were killed. And so fast forward all the Hollywood magic happens and the money exchange and the whatever, that they put all of these terms together and it ends up being Marty and Leo that come. And so from then on out, they worked closely with our tribe. That Martin Scorsese basically invited us to a very large table. No one understood how large that table was going to be. No idea whatsoever, or can even get your brain around it really still. But what he did was basically engage our tribe. And he took it from something that was this epic $200 million budget film and engaged consultants. We engaged artisans, elders, interviewed all 3 of our districts. We have 3 districts. And each of those family members would come and talk. The family members of Molly Burkhart came and started with his team. Sekelia came down from New York, and his researchers, Marianne Bauer, one of the key researchers for him and also a producer on this movie, and really immersed themselves in our culture to learn it and to understand us. And that's the one thing really, I get teary when I think about it. But everybody here wants to be seen and heard. And for Natives, in these kind of stories that are rarely told, and especially on this scale, rarely, ever. The last one was Dances with Wolves. I think that was 25 or 30 years ago. That we were actually invited into and asked what we thought, how we wanted to be presented, what was going to be offensive to us, what would be insensitive. They truly cared about what we thought. And so when they started making this film, they had a website go out and you could put your resume in. And my chief called and he said, Julie, are you putting your resume in for, the costume part? And I had a shop because I lived in DC for 34 years. And I would go up to New York and work with jobbers and bring home different fabrics and materials and goods that I could bring back to my people in my community that didn't have access to that. And then they could take this home. And I've worked as an art consultant, and some of the best art comes from families' kitchen tables. It's not in big studios, even though I'm not knocking that, but it comes from generations of families who really have studied and brought this and taught their family and taught their kids and taught these generations of why we have these things and why they would be presented the way they are, how we wear them. They are not costumes. We all struggle with that, but when you're doing a movie and they have certain categories, that's what you have to call it. But these are our clothes, and they represent who we are, and they are very important to us. And so we started engaging different people, and I sent the resume in. I was working for First Americans, and I decided to do both. And he said, Julie, we've got to have your eyes on it because you understand our clothing. And so they went ahead and they called when they started shooting, and it was later on into it. And what I realized when I walked into Jacqueline West's studio, and Jacqueline West was the head costume designer, and she'd never worked with a consultant before. A lot of Hollywood doesn't necessarily like to do that because it's like whatever your professions are, you would basically take the work that you have a degree in and know what to do and have done for years and ask someone else if it's okay. But I don't work like that. I really wanted to get in and understand where they were coming from because you have to meet people in life where they're at. And so I was going in to understand where they were on the level of telling our story. And when I came into her studio and I saw these just floor to ceiling panels, and we have an Osage Tribal Museum. This is one of the first and oldest tribally owned museums. It was built in 1860 in the country. And we have, because Osages had the money to have photographs taken, and we had the money to have film, which the only other people that had, at that time in 1920, the money to be able to shoot home video was the royal family. It was $1,500 a minute. And so we have film of this time period in the 1920s. We have all of these photographs. And you know, it's interesting because she had these storyboards, and I could see where she had us broken out in this time period, because what we were doing at that time was we were off of the prairie with Lizzie Q, the mother, who had grown up her whole life. We were over in Missouri, where we moved because we see the removal happening, and we actually purchased our land from the Cherokees. But it's one of those where our leaders then, in 1860, saw what was happening around us and the decimation of all of our neighbors. And we decided to go ahead and move. And we moved to a place that we thought was really terrible land. We figured that if we got to this place where this really piece of land that nobody would want, that they would leave us alone. And so we chose a place that we traveled because we were plains. So we traveled with our food source. So we went looking for, we know the buffalo will be here. We know that the grasses, where I grew up in Osage County, they get 6 feet high. And the minerals that are in those grasses actually come from oil that had no use at the time for us. So we knew there was a water source there, and that if we went, that probably we thought that was our safest bet of being safe. So you have Lizzie Q in this family and her husband. They raise these daughters, and the government comes in. Well, first of all the buffalo are killed, hoping that that will take care of us. And it didn't. And then we basically have this family who has their children taken away, because all of us then, because it was assumed by the people that were overseeing us that we didn't know how to raise our children. So they come in and basically say, all your children, your daughters are going to have to go to some kind of a Catholic or missionary school, and the sons are going to have to go to military school. And we're going to take your kids out because we know better. So all of these girls that you see in this movie have been taken away, and they were put in this missionary school. So now they come back. So now they're back, and we're trying to figure out how we fit into this world that's forced in on us. Everybody else is calling the shots for us. How are we going to fit here and stay safe? So for my people, on top of that, motor cars are invented, and we happen to be on top of this huge pool of oil, one of the biggest in the country. And all of a sudden, we have what I like to refer to as Kardashian wealth dropped on top of us. And so we're sitting there with money, and, you know, we didn't use money. We hunted, we traded. You know, there's a whole history in these clothes that you see, especially in our Osage clothes, of why we even wear those. All native wardrobe, all of their clothes from all these pueblos here and across the nation everywhere. If you sit down and start asking each one of them what these pieces mean to them, you know, and how they represent themselves, they're going to tell you stories of people coming into their lands, of trading, of how something came in that ended up filtering down into what we wear today. And so there's a whole history that's going on there that's kind of underneath, but it's telling a story of how we live. And so I saw, when I walked into Jackie's studio, she had broken it out for people that were trying to acclimate to a contemporary life, people that were trying to stay traditional, people that were trying to continue to wear their Osage on the outside but contemporary clothes. And each one of these is an example of how people were choosing to acclimate to this world, all hoping that it's going to keep us safe.
Thank you. Now, let me ask you, kind of along that line, can you speak about the clothing that was worn during that time period? Women and men wore high-end fashion. How did this trend start? Where were people shopping and getting the latest styles and fashions?
So I'm going to use the sisters up here. And if you sit down and you kind of take a look at how each of these ladies are representing themselves, the only one that I'm missing is Tantu, is Lizzie Q. So, so Lizzie Q stayed totally traditional the whole time. She wore her Osage shirt, she wore her wrapper around the house, she always had a blanket on, and she stayed within her tradition. And then her daughters come back, and so you have Rita that is sitting here, who's played by Janae Collins. And so Rita is wearing a Parisian couture style gown, or a dress, a day dress. And so what she has done is she's deciding to represent herself in Caucasian clothing, but she's keeping this blanket around her on the very front, on the outside, and those blankets tell you a story in themselves too, on men and women, about who they are and why they're wearing something. If she's got something on, she was going out to go to something that she wanted to look more formal, so this is how she's representing herself. If she's at home, she may wrap that under her arm. She may wear a shawl because she's got to use her hands at home. Or she may take it off altogether, you know, and then if someone comes to the door, puts that back around. The reason that we're wearing those is for modesty. That's why we have those on. And then we have different ways of wearing it for men. They're a long style like a chief would wear, Chief Bonnie Castle in this story. He's wearing a suit, and then he's wearing a blanket. Long style that lets you know he's a chief and a leader. We've got a spiritual man in this who's played by Tolly Redcorn. His costume, I actually researched from the Catholic Church, the Immaculate Conception Church in Pahaska has some very famous stained glass windows, one of which portrays from the 1920s several of the characters that are in this movie, including Chief Bonnie Castle and another one named Chief Bacon Rind. And so they had gone in the 1920s and they had purchased these stained glass windows because Osage just put a lot of money into the church, having been in the schools. And so they went to Germany and they had to go to get the Pope's dispensation to even have these windows put in. And they're exact likenesses. They're the only indigenous window in all of the world that has exact likenesses of the indigenous people. Usually if it's faces of angels or something, they're using a model for that or something else, but it's not an exact likeness. So they get this dispensation. Well, I was a brownie. And so I used to go down, and when I'd finish my project, they'd always have the little meetings at the Immaculate Conception Church. So I would sit down and finish my project, and I'm not Catholic, but you know, the church fascinated me because it had all the statues and the color, and the windows were so beautiful, and the sun coming through. And I used to study that window a lot. When I was 6 and 7, that's where I would go and sit and look at everyone in there. Well, I get a call one day I get a text actually from one of the producers and Jacqueline, and they're like, we have a new person that we're putting in this, a leader, and we'd like your thoughts on like what he should look like. So I said, have you been to see the stained glass windows at the Immaculate Conception Church? And they're like, no, it's been COVID and everything was shut down. I said, hang on. So I pull over in the Sam's Club, find a picture of this stained glass window, and then I zero in on Chief Bacon Rind that's in there. And I shoot it off to him. And there is one photo in this that I'll point out, that it's this emerald green shirt, but you only see the back of him. And he was a real dandy. Tons of pictures. He always had the finest glasses, and I'll tell you where he bought all that in a minute. And he had an otter cap on, and he had a pocket in the back. And so when he wanted to be fancy, he had these big pheasant feathers. But he had certain moods on certain days, so he would change those feathers out. So some days he'd put in his eagle feather, and some days he'd put in white fluffs, and some days he'd put in hawk feathers. And you could see it in these photographs, what he's doing, but he's changing this in and out. So I sent him this picture, and I said, I really think that we should replicate this. So in one of the main scenes that you see when Molly and Ernest are being married, Tali, who's playing that, is basically in these mescal beans. He has a pectoral cross on. He has a blanket that's wrapped around his waist, which tells you that he's what we call a roadman. But if you don't know what that is, it would be similar to a priest, but not really. But that's the closest I can get to it. And he has his moccasins on, and he's wearing slacks, but he's got on an Osage shirt. And so we replicated that, and the first time in the screening that I saw it, it was like watching that stained glass window come to life. It was amazing. So, each one of these people are telling you about who they are. So a lot of what they found, including Molly, who's decided to present herself in traditional clothing as a traditional Osage lady, and she's the quintessential, because she has money to put in her blankets and some of the finest fabrics. You have Anna Brown. She's in haute couture. And Osages had the money to travel to Paris to go to the couture houses and actually buy these clothes for themselves and then bring them back over. Most of the people in the movie, when you see they're wearing contemporary shoes and not moccasins all the time. Molly's the only one that really does, with the exception of when she goes to church. They're wearing French-style Parisian shoes that actually came from the rentals from the Titanic. So, but then you have Rita right here, who's played by Jillian Dion. And she's got on a really beautiful, when you lift that up, it's all this beautiful French embroidery that's around this 1920s dress that she's wearing, and they have these beautiful hats. But a lot of what you could buy in Osage County at that time in Fairfax, there was a trading company called Big Hill Trading. And Big Hill Trading had everything that you would ever want. The minute that they understood opportunity, this group came in, and it was really the first department store in Oklahoma. And you could walk in, and it was like you could buy furniture, dining sets, beautiful clocks, a wood-burning, stove, anything to do with your home. You could buy caskets. They sold everything for funerals in there, and then they had these counters and booths. It was huge. I actually just tore it down not too long ago. I was working with the chief to try to save it. And you walked in there, it's cavernous. And they had all of these stalls that still were there, and then counters. And one of those counters was a Tiffany's counter. Tiffany's from New York had come down and opened this small counter for them to be able to buy Tiffany's jewelry. They sold Pierce arrows. They sold every car you can imagine there. Even when I was growing up in the 1970s, we had 6 car dealerships, and I grew up in a town of 10,000 people. Cadillac. I mean, you name it, it was there. We didn't have Rolls Royce or Bentley, but pretty much under that, we had everything. My family always drove Pontiacs. But, it's one of those where I do think that you look at how amazing that was and how dangerous that was, all at the same time. Because no matter whether we were wearing a blanket, or we were wearing Tiffany's jewelry, or we were wearing Caucasian clothing, trying to keep ourselves in this culture that we were trying to understand, none of us were safe.
And that's what the book touches on, definitely so. So another question is, and you've touched base on this a little bit too, how important was it to you to make everything authentic and accurate?
Well, when I was growing up, the 2 things that we had on our 3-channel TV was Bonanza and Gunsmoke. That was it. We did have some John Wayne, but I wasn't allowed to stay up that late to watch late night movies. So it was interesting when you would look at these different, it was confusing, because you would look at these different series, and it was the only thing that was really showing cowboys and Indians. But then I grew up thinking that you were supposed to shoot the Indians because that's what happened in every episode. And then it was confusing to also sit down and see that I didn't see anybody who was dressed that I could relate to. Like, I understood that they had a red headband around it because it was color by then. But that was really from Desert Truck. We didn't dress that. No one in Oklahoma had that. And then you would see like something strange on the bottom that I didn't recognize, but then you would see a headdress, and I had friends that were, different tribes that had those in their tribes. But you never saw anything that was actually just that looked real, and nobody was a real Indian on there. I mean, everybody was painted, but nobody looked like us. And so I always remember having this conundrum of kind of like where we were. And I didn't really realize at the time that that was called cultural appropriation. I didn't know that. We weren't talking about it then. And so when I now got into my now 60, but anyway, when I got up here and I look back and we're having these conversations now that I'm grateful and thankful for, that we're really bringing these things out about how we're represented. So when I went in that day with the costume designer, and I really understood that Jackie understood and heard us on her own, and that Marty had really raised that bar, now for Hollywood really, so high, that that's all they were interested in, and that's all we wanted to be a part of. If it had been anything else, I would have just said, I'm going back to FAM and I'll see you guys later, and that would have been that. But it wasn't. We had artisans that came in from the community. We had something during COVID that we called a trunk show, because nobody could come into the facility, and everybody was masked up, and they had just had the vaccine, and everybody was going on back and forth about everything, and so we were trying to keep everybody safe. So what we did was we were in an airplane hangar in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and we opened up the back on the loading dock, and we put out, had the Osage News put out an ad out there about having this trunk show, and then we put it out on Facebook, because most natives like to be on Facebook. And so anyway, hey, we're having this trunk show. If you have anything that you would like to share that we can look at, nothing will be replicated as the same, but all of this will basically be understood and researched so that we can get the looks right, they're represented properly. And so please drive by for a trunk show. Put anything it is in the trunk and then open it up, and you can show us, and we'll be standing there to take a look at it and take photographs. So on the day that the trunk show arrived, it was like 9 a.m. in the morning, there were probably 60 cars, Osages that dug down into their trunks, which is where we keep all of our clothes. And these were old family pieces that normally, we're not the type to look what I've got or whatever. You never do that. And we're usually trying to not let people know what we have. And so, but the interesting part was we were seeing finger-woven pieces, finger-woven blankets of really old patterns and old yarn and colors that don't exist anymore, and old pieces of broadcloth that would be back from the 1800s that had been traded with us. And a lot of these things that you see, when Lewis and Clark and different people used to come into our lands, or anyone else, we had our own Homeland Security, we had our own Border Patrol, we had all of that. And so when you came up to our borders, our guys would stop you, which must have been pretty scary, and basically say, why are you here? Why are you here? They'd tell us, okay, well, stay here. And you guys stay with them, and we'll be back. And they would go back to the tribal leaders, and then the discussion would be, do we let them come in? They say they're here for X. They'd come in, and these were the high-level people. These weren't just, anybody off of a boat either. I mean, these were high levels that would be doing this. And they sat down, and of course, school system always teaches, passing the peace pipe, but that didn't have anything to do with it. We were sitting down trying to figure out how long you were staying and what you were doing there. All the questions that we ask in today in contemporary society, we were asking then. And then once we came to an agreement with you, there was trading, and so I had actually tried to recreate broadcloth at one time. But it's very hard to store, and I had to buy it in 10,000 yards because I wanted to offer something that was native made to the community, many communities. And the interesting part about it was when I started studying that, living up in D.C., I'd gone to Charlottesville, and I went to Thomas Jefferson's home, and he had the logs of a lot of different people that had come through from the British military. He had certain logs that he was keeping in his library, but also Lewis and Clark. And so I went through everything that was on their list of what they were coming across with that they brought as supplies. One of the supplies that they had thousands and thousands of bolts of was military broadcloth, because that was basically what they knew that they could trade. And that broadcloth that tells you the age is the selvage that's on it. There's somebody in here's got one on, I'll show you. But it would have these, we'll tell you also that how it was made. And depending on the rank was how many stripes was on that. So if you were over in Great Britain and you joined the military and you decided to go in and they gave you the ticket to go get your military coat made, then you would go in and you would give them the ticket and they would say, oh, okay, well, you're a colonel, so you're getting this stripe, finer quality. Oh, okay, you're a private, you're getting this, less stripes. And so that's how you could tell the quality of what you were getting. So they would just whack that off, and then they'd make your coat, and then you would go on your way. Well, we never wasted anything. So all of our skirts today, and all of those skirts from way back, or men's suits, or the different things that we did with that fabric, we incorporated that stripe in there. And that's how we can tell how old that broadcloth is. All of that was incorporated into the movie, to the point that we had wool made at a mill, Jacqueline did, and we brought it in. I sat down and we talked about, because Osage had a special stripe made for them called the Osage Delegation Stripe. And it was just one yellow stripe that went down the blanket. And there are very few of them that are originals left. And so that is one of the things that they put in. So everyone I worked with, including the workroom, the artisans from the Osage community, the people that were involved in bringing all of their family items and sharing with us, and that was incredibly generous. Really, that's why it felt like a community project, because everybody was getting a say, and that's what kept it authentic.
Thank you. So, in light of that question also, how much research was done for the clothing of this time period? Was there anything that surprised you when you did this research?
Well, for me, I mean, I wouldn't call it research. So, but I would say for Jacqueline and everyone, I think one of the things that absolutely stuns people are our Osage wedding coats. And so I'm going to flip to one here. We're going to pass by our sisters. And so this is an Osage wedding coat. And y'all, if this is too loud, you let me know. Okay, all right. So the history of this wedding coat basically is, I see what's happening. So basically the history of this wedding coat. So when the United States was new, the government, and it was Thomas Jefferson at that time who was the president, invited all these tribal governments to start coming and meeting with them. And this was really to show the might of the United States, this new country, over us. And so what they did was have us come. They had this meeting. And while they were sitting there with our Osage chief and our council, they had this general standing, or it was a colonel standing there, and he was in his military coat. And so the chief kept looking over and really kind of admiring this coat that this military man had on. And so when the meeting was finished, Jefferson looked over at the colonel and said, "Take that coat off and give it to him." So he takes this coat off, and as you would give diplomatic gifts, and of course we came with our own gifts, they exchanged gifts as diplomats do. Well, in Jefferson's notes, and he has extensive journals, but one of the things that he wrote about our people, and it's documented by several people, including LaFleche, and it's within the history, is that Osage men in particular were over 6 feet tall. They were strapping, and for that time period and, what we had to eat and how we were surviving, and then we were strapping, really big men. So, and Jefferson wrote that we were some of the most beautiful people, the men, because they're the only ones that got to go, but anyway, they were some of the most beautiful people that he'd ever seen. Well, these men were unable to wear these military coats. So because they couldn't wear European sizes. So what they did was come home and they gave them to their daughters. So what happened was, as these meetings would continue to happen, and this became one of the trade items I was talking about, when people would start coming into your borders, this was an item that was traded. And so what we did with it is something that I absolutely love, which is, and Jacqueline West does say it best, that she said there's this rebellious nature that is behind the beauty of this coat, because we took something that was to show power over us, and we added our own French ribbon when we traded with the French. We added gold buttons that we had collected. We have a finger-woven belt here when we traded for yarn. We have our own style that's quintessential Osage that you kind of see in this pattern. This is a chevron pattern, but there are family patterns with this. She has, that was a beaver hat, and at that time there's a whole history in these beaver skin top hats, because beaver almost became extinct because of them in the 1800s. But we clearly admired that. It incorporated its way in. We chose to decorate that with hackles and hackle feathers that we dyed and colored and made, turn the brim into that. There's a piece of over a very wide French ribbon that's around that, and then there's a silver band. And then you see these silver ball and cone earrings. And a lot of the silver that you see really across the nation when you see different tribes, treaties were made with us all the time. And when these treaties were signed and agreed upon, a peace medal was given. And usually those peace medals were given to a chief and several people there. And they were like, they call them a friendship medal, and they are, but until that treaty's broken. And so what happened with those medals is that once that treaty was broken, we'd strike them, melt them down, and we would start making silver with them. And that is how silver incorporated into a lot of what we have. There's a great book called The Covenant Chain that talks about really upstate New York and all of that and how it came. But that is really part of the history of why you see a lot of silver in certain tribal clothing. And so we have a lot of that. And behind this is basically a French ribbon that hangs all the way down in the back with a pin, a brooch that hangs in the back. I'm going to switch to another here. There is that holy man I was telling you. There's Chief Bacon Rind over there to the left. And there's the bad guy. Very bad guy. Okay, so what I want to point out here, because this is a whole other layer of authenticity that's happening. So over here, the blanket that Tantu Cardinal was wearing. During COVID, I have a friend that owns a museum in Bentonville, Arkansas, that's the Native American Museum. And I called and asked because they had several pieces from the 1920s. And one of the things that we wear a lot of is beading on broadcloth. That's one art that we wear. And I call them art because they are. We don't know who makes these pieces. They're unknown artists, but the reality is they rival any haute couture house at that time. And so this is a fully beaded blanket that you see her in that I did replicate down to the bead with the museum's approval. And it was called a pink thistle pattern. It belonged to a family called the Tinkers. And so this went to that museum, and it's beaded all around, and Tantu kind of has it like this, but if you put it on, and we wear our blankets with our fists like this, so that we don't want anybody to miss all of that work. And it's 2 panels going all the way down, all fully beaded. So then you come over here to where Minnie is next to her, and you see that water lotus pattern that's on that. And there was a family that had some clothing for auction that I saw probably 15 years ago when I came out here for the Santa Fe Art Market. And I went into, it was Cowboys and Indians, and it was all hand-stitched out of hand embroidered, and it was the thick cotton, like you couldn't find the color anymore. And of course with hand embroidery, when you get, true artisans that are, experts at that, the back will look as beautiful as the front does. And so I saw that at an auction, and we were sitting around one day talking about what these girls were going to be wearing in the wedding. And so I said, we should look at this water lily. Well, it turns out that Jacqueline actually had a photograph of a hominy Osage. We don't call them bridesmaids, but that's how I'm going to refer to them so that everybody understands, these bridesmaids. And she said, well, I found this picture of what you're talking about. And so I explained to her when I saw that. And, I'm someone that lives through life kind of like, it's interesting that I saw it 15 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's recalling, but it's going to come to life somewhere else later in my life. And it always kind of happens for me that way. And so I went ahead and had a friend of mine replicate what we had in that photograph for that. And that was a black and white photo, but we decided to go ahead and make it white so it would show up. This beaded pattern style here is a Ponca style pattern. A lot of Poncas, they're the tribe over from us. And they also came over and gave us their drum when we moved. Part of our history is with them. We were all one tribe at one time as Plains Indians and traveled together. And then when we broke up, for whatever reasons, the Ponca tribe, we ended up, when we picked that land, went over there, kind of by our brothers and sisters over there. And so they did a lot of our beading for us, and this is a Ponca style pattern. So that's beaded. And then you see what Lily has on, because you see her belt and everything, but that is actually, she has on underneath this an Osage shirt. She has a set of pins, silver Wabanka pins is what we call them. If you have one, you're a grandmother. If you have 2 on, you're married. And if you're wearing 3, you're single. So she has on a skirt underneath that's a ribbon work skirt. And this blanket that she's got on top is a ribbon work blanket. Ribbon work blankets basically that particular one had 27 yards of ribbon in it. And basically, we have not an applique process, but a cut and fold process. I had a great aunt that used to do a lot of ribbon work for people in the tribe, and she had this old treadle machine that she would, and she really, when it became the new Singer sewing machines, she didn't like them because she couldn't control, she learned that she couldn't control how crisp those points would be, and how that, and when I say, when I talk about these processes, these are the processes of true artisans, that's who we are, all of our cultures. And so this particular blanket was made by a family, Maria Lookout. The Lookout family has a tradition of making ribbon work. I engaged them with several other ribbon work makers within the tribe. And so they made this blanket. It's one of their family patterns. And then you see that there's a hand on there just peeking out. And so that hand is like right here under the hand. But if it were right here, so that's the hand of my friend or family. This is the hand of my enemy. And I always find it kind of very amusing that there's this fabulous picture in our museum of this little girl. She's 4 years old, and she has her hair up, and they have braids, and she's got her little Osage clothes on. You can tell some grandmother, took great care in getting her ready for this picture and had made all of her finest for her. And she's got this little ribbon work blanket that she's holding with, ribbon work like that. and it's got these hands on it. And I was like, boy, that little girl's telling a story. Like, there's some story in that family, because it's Hand of My Enemy on there. And I just always kind of, look at that and think, I wonder what that story is telling about that, because that's clearly something in that family that was very important to them, or the grandmother wouldn't have made it that way. And all of our families make our clothing most of the time, unless your family isn't left, and then someone who had a shop like mine, that's what we did. So everything that you see here, she is going to give this away. She's giving everything that she has away to someone who helped her with her wedding. And these kind of weddings where you've got, another beadwork, this great pattern, which is a traditional Osage pattern, and then you have another blanket over here. That one was made by Janet Emdy. And then you see all their different belts. But every one of these women were either being given these coats or they were giving them away to someone. But in particular, Lily's character is someone who helped get everything ready. And so for arranged marriages, it started off with the family would decide, and then that family would decide who you were marrying, and the men's family would bring over groceries. And they would leave them. And if you took the groceries and prepared a dinner, you were agreeing to this. And so then they would be coming in, and then you would start planning this. So a lot of preparation goes into this, and a lot of times there's a 1920s film of an Osage wedding. And I always get tickled because there's so much on this bride. I mean, so many shirts, so many coats, so many pins, so many skirts, so many belts. And there's another finger-woven belt under that. That these 6 women are carrying her on a blanket to get her into the arbor so that they can stand her up so then they can get started. And so, but anyway, they definitely, when we had our weddings, we actually have these clothing today. We have all this clothing today. And of course, we don't do it for arranged marriages any longer. But we carry these pieces and this history into our traditional dances now. And so our dances are called Inlanchka. And so we have arbors that are set up. And these are not powwows. That's something that's invented. These are traditional dances. And so we do it once a month in June, and we do it for 3 weeks. And we're invited to all different districts. Each district, we have Pasuli, which is Fairfax Gray Horse. We have Zanzoli, which is Hominy. And we have Wakakali, which is my district, and that's Pahaska. And so we each have drum keepers. And so every several years, and the drum keepers take care of all of the details their family does that goes on within the dances in these 4 days in our districts. And there's 3 different ones. And what they do is they make sure that meat is provided to all the camps, because we have camps outdoors. They have a committee dinner that goes on within a building that we have, but it invites all the men, the manpower and the men that it takes and the families to sit down and have this committee dinner. And it's hundreds of people. We have cooks that they choose for the next 4 years or so that prepare all of this food. And those cooks are, in particular, are pillars of our community, because without them, none of our tradition as far as feasting would happen. Our dinners would not happen. Our funerals. You have a head cook that will then talk with families when someone passes away, and we bury our people within 4 days after you pass away. And we have a dinner after we put them in the ground at midnight, or at noon. And so what happens after that is they have this big dinner. And the dinner is usually chosen by the person that made their menu before they pass on. And what they do is they basically sit down and write down what they want to have. And so when we go to that dinner is for us. Because that person, after they cross on over to the other side, they're on that good side that's basically, I just had a friend pass away, so this is getting me a little, but they're giving me those blessings. They're giving us all those blessings, and that's why we're partaking in that food. That's why we're having that. And so when we dress like this for our drum keepers, it's usually when they're passing that drum to the next person, to the next round of cooks, to the next camps, for the next committee that's selected. So there's a process and an order to everything. And so that is where we still carry this out. And you will see at least, I think Hominy was the last group, and they had 8 different wedding coats. We don't trade them anymore with the government or the military, but we make our own now. And families get together and they do this. And so anyway, it's a lot of preparation for that. And we're still giving away, and we're using that tradition, but we just use it in a different way.
That almost brings some of our traditions, excuse me, within our Pueblo communities as far as cooks and lead cooks and head cooks and serving food and welcoming people into our homes. So I can see that relationship.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Are there any takeaways from working on this film that was so huge, and any lessons learned?
There were a lot of lessons because there was a large learning curve. And it's a learning curve that's continued for me, and for really all the natives that were involved in it. I mean, what I found really wonderful about the project was that it had the most amount of natives ever in a production of background extras. And I mean tribal people from all over, from different nations all over. And so everybody was wanting to be in this Scorsese movie, and everyone was excited for the fact that a story like this was being told that was indigenous. So people were like sending resumes for background and everything in droves. Learning, if you're not in this industry, what the protocol is of the industry, how you're supposed to behave on set, what you're supposed to be doing when you get there, what kind of jobs are available. And there are so many jobs within the movie and film industry that natives need to be coming in every level of that. If we want true representation for ourselves, we must go after that. We must recognize that and do it ourselves. And that means going to get the education, really sitting down and thinking about where your moves are going to be within that. And it can be electrician, it can be gaffers, it can be carpentry, set design, prop, costume, workrooms. I mean, there are massive workrooms with this. Costume building, actually having or knowing. And for me, I watched everything, and then what I did was adapt it to the next project that I worked on as an Indigenous cultural consultant, and we can get to that in a minute. But there are many different avenues for natives to go down. And you will sometimes walk in and everything's hustling and bustling, and it's hot, or you're standing in mud, or it's raining, or costumes are going this way and that, or someone isn't quite getting it right, or a set or a prop doesn't look quite right. And so, if you're in these areas, you have a say and an influence into how that happens for your own representation. And I really encourage anyone who's native to get in this industry.
Your recent work includes serving as the head of the Indigenous Cultural Department on a new TV pilot for Netflix. Can you tell us about this project?
Well, they make you sign things, so I'm trying to figure out what I can say. I lived out in Santa Fe for 6 to 8 months. We had the strike in between there, so I came back to finish up the work. But what I did, and what this movie did, which this is where I learned it all, and where everyone learned it all on there, is this has a lot of our language in it. And a huge part of it, and some of it does not have subtitle, which I love. Marty chose not to do that because you don't have to have subtitles with a language to sometimes understand what's being said. And if an actor's doing their job, you're going to get the gist of exactly what's happening on that screen. And so I came on with Netflix. The name of it's American Primeval, and it's coming out December 2024. And so, anyway, the director's Peter Berg. And he did Friday Night Lights and Entourage. And so he chose a story, and it involved 3 different tribes from the Utah-Wyoming border. So Paiute, Southern Paiute, Ute, and Eastern Shoshone. And so what I did was come in, really through our connections I had as an art consultant, but really understanding what we were going to need. What I recognized is that the producers, in particular with Hollywood, because it's so new to how you do this, that I sat down with them, and it's like, here's a list of what your expectations should be. If you have someone who comes in and says to you, I can help you with the language, I can help you with the clothes, I can help you with this and this and this, and they're in a tribe from somewhere else, like myself, don't waste your money there. That person is never going to have every answer because you're Native American. We don't speak Native American. You know, we don't dress Native American. We each have individual personalities. We each have different etiquettes and culture, and we each need to have the opportunity to tell that story. And we need to have the people from our own tribes, our own nations coming in and telling that. So I said, you need to engage 3 different teams. And the teams that you need is you're going to need a linguist, a man or a woman, or a man and a woman, depending on if they have a dialect that's female and male. You're going to need a historian. And we're going to get this through different people. And you know, the one thing that I love about dealing with artists, and I have always gravitated to that no matter what occupation I've had, but artists are always researching and telling a story of a history, their history, and how they view this. So when it's time to sit down and I needed to find these people, and I needed to do it within like 10 days. It wasn't like, oh, here. I mean, it was come on and let's get running and can you do this? So I just said, give me 10 days. And if it doesn't work out in 10 days, we'll call it good. Well, I went out to those communities. I worked through my artisans. I actually called my friend Marita here, who had an occupation at IA. She hooked me up with several people from different tribes, and I mean, I started skating. And I found within 10 days the linguists that I needed for all 3 tribes, the historians that I needed for all 3 tribes. I had a cultural person from all 3 tribes, and then you've got different, and then I had to find some extra for principals that sometimes like want to work with a linguist one-on-one on their own, which one of our principals was speaking a lot of a particular language, and he wanted that. But the other thing that I was doing was also trying to find people, because it's not just have a Zoom call. You then have to come on set. And the things that you're talking about with these people, because I worked with every department, so it was costume, then it was set design. Well, what do 3 different tribes live in? Because it isn't all the same. Not everybody's living in a longhouse. You know, not everybody's living in a teepee. Not everybody's living in a pueblo. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like you've got to really sit down. And so I remember opening up that call that day, and there were 22 people on there. I honestly thought I was just going to be talking probably with the costume person. That's what I thought. And everybody's got these questions going on, and I'm like, when are you going to be shooting this? And they're, you know, talking about it, and then I just kind of said, okay, everybody here has to give me their most urgent, second urgent, and then something I can work on in 3 weeks, and I need drop-dead dates from everybody. And don't ask me the tourist questions. You know, don't ask me what an owl means, or don't ask me something. I mean, like, ask what you need. If you're going to use an owl and you're going to put it on something, then put it in a way that I know exactly what you would be putting that on. Get detailed with me. Because the people that I'm going to are going to ask back, well, what is it being put on? What are we doing? So everybody there began with me doing that. And then I took it to the experts that I had, and then I had a team of people that were able to leave some of their jobs, because a lot of us, you know, may work for our tribes or have our own businesses and all these different things, that were able to come on set. You know, and that's something else where you're teaching people who are not in the industry, not part of a guild, not part of a union, not part of the Hollywood machine, but we're indigenous people that need to figure out our way about how we're going to interact with this. And then I'm training them. This is what you have to do. This is where you'll be living. This is how you get paid. This is how you fill out a time card. Then I'm going to the producers and I'm saying, don't say that. Don't do that, or let's read through this one more time, So then you're working on a different level, and then you're also working, as for my position, on a corporate level. Because corporations have things like, well, we don't do advance per diem. I'm like, well, how are these people who are leaving their jobs going to pay for food when they get here while they're helping you with the research to do that? At 2 weeks, they're not going to be able to go without. So what are you going to do? You need to think about this, because if this is new to you, you figure it out. So you're really sitting down and working with all of these entities, and these are not things that I knew how to work with. But when you are thrown into the river, you will swim. You will swim. And that river was going fast, and it was like swim. And so I did. And that's how this production that's now coming out. And the one thing I remember one person had said to me was, well, Julie, we don't have $200 million. And I said, you don't need $200 million for authenticity. You need the people who can actually tell you what authenticity means and is. And that does not take you $200 million. Your budget, you can find it. And they do. They do.
Okay, can you give us your reaction to the Oscars now that you've had some time to reflect?
Wow. It's an eye-opener.
Yeah.
So what I want to begin with that is I understand, that not everybody gets to touch the ball in a game. I totally understand that. And I also understood really working within this production. And every movie, every actor, every person that was up for that has worked as hard and stood in heat and stood in whatever. Everybody's trying to make their project the best. But I can't help but sit down and think of the odds of this. That David Grann would happen to be at a dinner in Brooklyn, New York, and hear a story. And something, someone who's not Osage but knows the Reign of Terror story happens to tell him this in a comment at a dinner party he's at. He ends up coming down to Osage County to our museum, and my Aunt Catherine Redcorn is the one who takes him through. And he's looking at these photographs and these big panoramas, and he's asking these questions, and he chooses out of, all of the tens of thousands of indigenous stories, he chooses this one. Then you sit down and you think, it goes on the New York bestseller list. Martin Scorsese reads it. He reads everything, everything. And he sits down and it piques his interest. It's something he hasn't done. He wants to do this. And so he's sitting down and he's figuring out ways how to tell our story. He's going out, he's pulling in the best people that he can. And he's thinking at it already on an authentic level that nobody's done before. He may be 81 years old, but that man is a Renaissance man. And he will be a Renaissance man in perpetuity. Because he sat down and thought, how can I do this and show the story? And originally it was written a different way. It was written because the book was written about the FBI and Tom White. Mm-hmm. And it was because of that time during COVID and that shutdown, Leo calls him and basically says, where's the heart of this story? Like, I'm looking at this, and we've got it written, and it's beautifully written, and it's a great script, and so they said, Molly. Molly is the heart of the story. And the way Marty says it, too, is it was a story. He said, usually people tell these stories, and it's a whodunit. This story is about who didn't do it, who wasn't involved in it. And so that they talked about, and they pulled all the script out and threw it out and they rewrote that script from Molly's perspective because they saw her as the heart of the story. And Leo was like, we don't need another white savior story. We actually need the character in it who is a husband that is married in, who can actually marry in this native woman, profess to love her, which the family says that they did have a great love. I mean, there are many twisted love stories in the world that exist today. And so, acting themselves out. And so that's the part where it's like, and say and love this woman and his children and carry these evil acts out. How did that man live with himself? I want to play him because he's really the more interesting guy in this. And so they rewrite it that way. And so then they decide to tell an Osage part of, or the perspective on this story, which wasn't meant to happen. Then they sit down and start looking for money. And you've got, Paramount, who wasn't interested. It was something like $180 million, I think is what I read. Now they need more money. And to be honest with you, after COVID, and they were having to build laboratories and do testing every day, and they had to build their own. I mean, it was a lot more just with a layer of that. And especially, there was over 1,000 people on the cast and in background and everything else. I mean, so it's a lot of people you've got to be testing daily. Like every 3 days you got on a cadence. And so, excuse me, I need some water. So then you're sitting there and they're trying to go out and find the money for this. And he brings on a producer named Daniel Lupi. And Daniel goes out and they start trying to get money, and they decide to call on Apple, who's never done a major motion picture like this. They have done movies, but not one like this. So their first major motion picture out of the box is with a Martin Scorsese movie. And they decide to take $200 million, of which many people are having a problem with that, and tell an indigenous story. They were the ones that were willing to take money and put their money where their mouth was and make this authentic. And I am grateful every day for Marty, for Apple, for wanting to sit down and tell this story. And then it kind of progresses into creating this authenticity. So we get to the Oscars. We're up for 10 nominations, which is a miracle in itself when you think about how many movies are out there. And so this has made it, above all those, it has made it into these, top 5. And that basically from there, we have history being made at the Oscars for Native people. And we're sitting there watching, our lovely Lily, win a SAG award and win the Golden Globe Award. She has made history because of this movie, because of these people that chose to help tell this story. People are always talking about, well, it's about the money. It wasn't. They wouldn't have taken the time and the energy if it was about money. Corporations don't do that. Apple did. They cared. Marty cared. Producers cared. And so now we're up at the Oscars, and, there are fabulous films that are up. And so the one thing, it was a shocker. It was really a shocker that when Lily didn't get it. But, we've got a ways to go in this industry. And I remember being at a museum gala several months ago, and Angela Bassett won an award, an Academy. And she was talking at this dinner, and she was talking about how hard it was for, the Black community to break into this. And the Latino community talks about it, and the Asian American Pacific talks about it, and they have categories in the Academy for this. I mean, I watched Golden Globes where they had one that was just those 3 minorities. And so I'm thinking, I'm waiting for our name to get up there. I'm waiting to get our place at that very big table that we've already been to. And now we have to work ourselves as natives to get there. That Angela Bassett said that after Hattie McDaniel won for Gone with the Wind. It was 30 years later before Whoopi Goldberg won. And they have 52 people. I looked up the statistics because I'm like that. How many of these different minorities have won Oscars? Because this is our possible first. And when she lost, I remember thinking, I probably don't have 30 years, but I'm praying that we get there before that. I really do. And it's going to take all of us to do it. So the other thing I thought was interesting is our song. Our song. Now, I really am going to have to work on not crying about this because the singers that are up there are singers that I have grown up since childhood listening to and knowing them in our community. My grandfather was the only Native man that was part of the city council and was the city manager of our small town, Pawhuska. And I grew up, a lot of these families, are these singers that have had these songs passed down. And so Scott George and this group, a lot of them, there are a couple of brothers, the Big Horse Brothers, but there's a whole group in there, and then these lady singers. And so it now comes time for them to submit that song. Well, my buddy Chad Renfro is looking over, says, send me the paperwork. And it's the only thing that, as far as the music goes, there's like Apple owns the license and everything for that. It's on Apple Music, you can download it. But we don't write our song on sheet music. Natives, that's not how, it's usually oral. We don't do sheet music. Well, in order to be a part of the academy, to be considered, you have to write down your music on sheet music. So they get all of this paperwork, and they start looking at it. And so Chad calls, and he's like, Scott, and of course he's also working with the people from Apple, do you know how to put this on sheet music? And Scott goes, no, And so they go ahead and they engage Apple. Apple gets someone who's he was like, I'm not sure I can do it either because of the way the beats and the singing, everything that's happening, and we don't work with notes. But Scott happened to have a friend that is, I think, the head of the music department at OU, at Oklahoma University. And he has gone and studied our music, and he said, I think I have a way to do that. And really within a day, he had that all lined out and written, and it was submitted just to be considered. So then it's chosen. It gets fast-tracked, and it's chosen. And so, I say we, but really Chad starts working to get this produced on stage and starts working with the guy that does all the performances on stage. And it's interesting watching for the first time ever for people hearing maybe sometimes for the first time true indigenous music. They wrote the song because we didn't want our traditional songs to be out in the world for anybody to use. They didn't want people using our songs for, drum groups or whatever. That's our traditional songs to us. But this is something that could be put out for everyone. The media that goes on with it, too, is that when people are asking questions, they don't know what to call it. So you're almost training the media, and I mean like the Washington Post, the New York Times, Variety Magazine, Hollywood Reporter, whatever. And the person who's interviewing may say, well, the drum group. It's like, no, that's not a drum group. That has nothing to do with us. These are our traditional drummers and singers. Put that. We're a group. It's a drum group. So then, you're trying to train them how to use the terms, which is good because that's teaching people about who we are. So then you're going through, and then all of a sudden, I remember one person talking about, the chants. And I'm thinking, I looked over at Chad, and he was like, yeah, we're correcting it, but it's like, we're not monks, and we're not meditating, we're not doing any of that. We're singing, and this is an actual song. So, and we're telling you a story like all songs would. And so we bring that in, and I mean, it was, when it got up there, it's a 6-minute song. Chad got a minute 45, and he asked to have 10 of our dancers come. And so our dancers were allowed to come in. You know, we didn't have as many as Barbie. We didn't have the, 3 minutes or the 5 minutes that the Ken song got or that Billie Eilish got, but then those are like the people of the day who are really the people out there, and that's what people understand. But we got a historic minute and 45 seconds to get up there, because we also end our songs a particular way. We don't have songs that you take a soundbite of and do that. Other songs, you can do that, not with this. So even those dancers that are up there are called tail dancers. We end our songs, and they dance a certain way when a song ends. So we're sitting in the crowd, and the chief and his wife, Julie, and Chad and myself, and all the indigenous people that were in there. When that song came on, we stood up to honor them. And it was a true honor, because it's the first time that you know that in history that an indigenous song has been up on that stage. And the fact that, again, Creator would have it, God would have it, that we would be the ones chosen to be up there. And those men are up there with the best hearts, and those women up there with the best hearts, and the good ways, and the good intentions that we feel within our cultures. And they're putting that out for the whole audience in the world to have. Not just to see, to have. Because it's blessings when you're doing that. And I felt that sitting in there. I really did.
Okay, we are getting kind of to our end point here, but I do have a couple of other questions. What's your best advice for someone leaning towards a career in film, or any advice in general?
I think anyone, I encourage anyone who wants to get into it, again, to really educate yourself, really research it, what you want to do, what you think you want to be a part of. Understand that there is, like in any job, there's a protocol and there's a way that you do things. But also with an understanding that if you're going to do that job as an indigenous person, you can have a say, no matter what it is. You may be working with someone, and they may think it should look or be one way. And you're realizing that that's not really correct. That's not really what should be happening. You do need to voice that in the most professional way that you understand and know how. Because when we get into altercation part, sometimes people can't hear us. But if we come in from a helpful heart and, and really understand that, and you've got to pick your moments and really back it up when you say it. But I really think the more and more people that we have start infiltrating into the industry, we will have a place, we will have a say, and we will all have the same chair will be waiting for us at the big table. And everybody needs to sit down. It's not about the awards. It's about the history and the truth of what we do. And as long as you have truth behind you and a heart of integrity going into this business, you will be a winner. You will be a winner, and we all will. Okay.
So I'd like to ask, I think as far as the Oscars were concerned, the whole ceremony, everything, the drum group, but with the movie in itself that you had to work on, what was the highlight of that part?
Oh my gosh, there's so many highlights. So one of my jobs was to basically work with Lily every day. She would be a bright highlight in that. I definitely was, what would happen is Jackie and I would sit down and look through research. Workroom would be working on certain things. I'd be working with Adrian Dyers and different people. And then once every Sunday, I would get a digital book. And it would be all the looks that would be coming up for the different scenes. And it was not just the principal actresses and actors, but it was background too. So it's, you're really spending a bit sitting here looking through and kind of, this is right, this is, whatever, maybe if we should take this off or we should try. So it was like that, and I would send my notes back every Sunday. And so once they would get all the clothing on, I would then have to sit down because the script changes all the time. Because, maybe it would sit down and Marty would have, sees it in his head and he, maps it out the way he maps things out for himself. And then all of a sudden it would be in front of him on the screen and it would be not quite what he wanted. And all directors do this. This isn't just Marty, it's everybody. But the good ones will sit down and basically like, okay, this didn't really come across on the camera the way I wanted it to. Let's try this. Well, depending on what those actions are, would also be how I would wrap those blankets and those shawls on people. If it's a funeral, you're going to wear something a certain way, and it depends on, what you're doing. And so he would have closed rehearsals for the actors and actresses hours before he would shoot. And then when they were finished setting up the scene, and he'd be looking at it, then they would come down to the set to finish up makeup and hair and everything else. And so I would make a point of always going into Lily's trailer. And I would say to her, okay, so show me your actions. I would have already read the script, but it was like actions speak louder than words, right? So I'm like, show me your actions of actually what you're doing in this scene. How are you holding your hands, or what does he have you doing? So we would discuss it, and I remember walking into the trailer one day in particular, and it was when Lizzie Q, Molly's mother, Lizzie Q, is dying. And so now Lizzie Q's role in that scene is becoming a caretaker for her ailing mother. And so she has this beautiful black shawl that has all this crisscross fringe. And she's supposed to have this on over her traditional clothes, have a comb, and be combing her mother's hair to soothe her as she's passing away. She's combing her hair. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to make all this work. And I said, okay. I said, I know. So we wrap that around. So I wrap it underneath, and I take that fringe, and I flip it over. And then I hand her the comb, and I said, now do the action. So she starts doing that. And there are several other things that are going to be happening within that scene. And so we sit and we work on that. Well, shortly after that scene, they had also practiced one where there was wailers. So you see 3 women that are standing out in these 3 black shawls, and they're loudly wailing and lamenting over Lizzie Q's death and its family members. And so what's happening is now they're going to be taking these shawls, same black shawls, because this is protocol of what you would wear, and they have them, and they're holding them like this as they're standing outside to the sky, and they're wailing. And they're giving up those prayers, and they're wailing. And so you're going to do that because it's more of a respectful way of covering yourself in doing this. So every day was a different day. And depending on what was happening with her, or if it was one of the sisters, Anna was really a flapper from the 1920s, but occasionally, and she was the wild child. But, she had the couture clothing and the braids in her hair and all that. But then when you see when the first sister goes, when Minnie dies, everybody's back in their traditional clothes. Everybody's back into who they really are. And so, with her, she had a scene where she was really grieving, and she has a shawl, and it kind of comes off. And, we're kind of, at some points, the discussion was, and it was with a man that has passed away, who was the elder on the advisor on there, Johnny Williams, and he's talking about, how she's going to be grieving when this is happening. And so we're discussing then what's going to happen when she does that, because she's not going to be holding a shawl. This would be real life. And so, so it was different, just different daily changes to the script, different actions that would be happening, and working closely with them was really one of the highlights, because I always walked away from there after watching it, and I would sit in the back, and they had a screen. I would sit back with a lot of the camera guys and look in the back and watch it happening. And I could see really where how everything was playing out and how it really looked, and would be very pleased about, the accomplishment of the day, that it really came across. And I would say the other thing that I think is absolutely, there are two things, absolutely beautiful, and it's the men. So one of the men that's up there, Yancey Redcorn, plays Chief Bonnycastle. And he sat down and read the script, and he approached Marty. And that's the thing. I mean, to go approach someone of that level as an actor never happens. It's like everybody has the road you stay on, and that's the road you stay on in your job. Well, Yancey sees it, and he's like, I think that he would not say this. And Marty said, really? He goes, no. He goes, I actually think that he would say, and he kind of starts with it, and he's like, listen, Yancey, you go home, and you write something and let me look at it. Next day, Yancey comes back with what he thinks the character of Chief Bonnycastle would say. And Marty says, okay, do it. So we're in this little old cafe that was in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, that they've transformed into where these men are meeting with one of the first federal agents to talk about what's happening to us. And so Chief Bonnycastle is sitting there, and he starts talking, and I'm back behind the camera after straightening all those guys up. And he starts saying, I was, in the war. I was one of the first people over the wall at the Boxer Rebellion, and I knew who my enemy was. And if I could see and know who this enemy is, I would kill them, because, I would know them and I would kill them, but we can't see them. We don't know who the enemy is, and we need help. And he's really just bringing it and delivering this. And it's so powerful when you watch it. And so the other person that is in this is a man named Everett Waller. And it's when they're in the big council and the women are there, and they've decided to go as a delegation, and they're going to D.C. to basically throw themselves on the mercy of the president to help us. And so there's a man in the tribe who is cultural. He takes care of everybody when they pass away. He's a road man, and he takes care of the families in his district. He's from Hominy District, named Everett Waller. And I have become really, you're good friends with everybody when you're out on the road like this. They become kind of your band of brothers. And the casting director told this story, Ellen Lewis. And actually, she was telling me about the day that they were doing this huge casting call and had all these different people coming in, and they were looking for all these different Osage actors to come in. And they had certain parts that they still hadn't really found the right native guy for yet, and they needed more people to come in. And this pretty girl comes in who's in her 20s, and she's auditioning and everything, and so she's just gotten out of law school, and it's his daughter. And she really wants to be in the movie. So anyway, they're like, do you happen to know anybody else in the community that might come? And she goes, well, there's my dad. And she said, do you think you could go get him? She goes, well, he's working, but he might be able to come. I mean, I can go over and I can go check. So Everett comes walking in, and he's big. He's like those big men that Thomas Jefferson wrote about, 6 foot and strapping and kind of scary. And so Everett comes walking in and walks up, and he's like, I want you to put her in this film. And Ellen says, they're standing there like, we're going to put her in the film. Well, I don't know what you all want me doing, but I'm telling you, it's important to me you put her in this film, or I'm not doing anything. And so anyway, she's like, no, we would like you to read for this one part. And he didn't care one iota whether he was in the movie or not. He's a man with things to do. And so anyway, he reads for this part, and they're like, wow, because he's got this big booming voice. So they get him. He goes into this part as one of the councilmen. And so now the story flips to Marty. So Marty says that they're out on set, and he's got a tent over here, and then Robert De Niro has a tent here, and then back behind here, because it was really hot, it's like 107 outside, and so they were trying to air condition. I mean, anyway, I'm not even going to complain about our weather because it's going to always be that way, but anyway. So, but Everett and the councilmen are sitting back here, and they're sitting back there kind of waiting. And Everett's talking to these other Osage men, and he goes, when our people were over there in, Missouri, he said, we weren't sitting there asking for the good life. We were just asking for life. This is what we wanted, was just life for our kids, and, just something help keep us going. Well, Bob grabs Marty. He's like, you got to listen to this guy. So they're listening, and Marty goes in the tent, and he goes, Everett, do you think you could say that again? And he goes, what? And so he said, say what you were saying about life. So when you see that scene in the movie, Everett's up there being Everett, but a wonderful Everett. And he's really talking and telling you something really about how it was and how it still is on some days for us. And so that's one of the highlights. I love watching those two men in particular because I know how much they really brought to it from their heart, really.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. So right now is a time for some Q&A from the audience. I have Beth, our Deputy Director, Beth Stone. She'll go around if there's anybody who has questions. And please use the microphone. This is being recorded, so we do need to have you speak into the mic.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering, what happened to the clothing? Was it returned to the people? Is it shown in the Osage Museum? Is it in Western costume?
It's owned by Apple. There are discussions that are going on about what is going to happen to a lot of that, and really working with our Osage Tribal Museum and several people about showing that clothing in perpetuity. But I don't know what those discussions are. I just know that they are happening. Also, there was an exhibit that went out, and I was in charge during a lot of it for dressing all of the Osage mannequins to make sure that they were properly put together, because they would travel before all of these openings for voters, for the academy, and for different people to come and visit and take a look at that. And there was a really great company called Civic that does these big stage sets. And so what they did was Apple put together a virtual exhibit that you can find with them if you put it up, Killers of the Flower Moon virtual exhibit, that anyone anywhere can go in at any time and take a look at this exhibit and see everything. And it begins with, kind of the landscape of where we live. It has, it talks about Marty's portion of this, and all of us that worked on it, have something that we've said in certain exhibits as you go through there and all the different venues. It shows our, Osage clothing and what went into, like Leo's jacket and the Western clothing. I mean, Jackie really dressed Ernest like a kept man of an Osage would truly be, with beautiful jackets and that kind of thing. And a lot of the blankets that were in there were purchased, are one of a kind. And so a lot of this is really going to be going into different exhibits, and it will be shared. It will be shared. It's not all going to some dusty warehouse somewhere. And properly taken care of, because those pieces, a lot of them, you know, as it happens, you know, in the museum world, if you don't have your collections taken care of, they disintegrate and die. So something's in the works so that does not happen to this.
Hi, I wanted to ask, I know you spoke of the red wedding jacket earlier. Do the women still use that traditionally in modern times?
The Osage wedding coats? It's used in Lanchka dances when we do something called passing of the drum. And so we have as many of those coats, the families who are involved in that, drum keepers, when they pay for it. And it's going to the family they're paying for the drum, and it's a previous drum keeper. And so all of those, or anyone that's really helping with that, and so all of those are now made, and we use it in a traditional way within that particular venue now.
It struck me in the movie, the shawls that they wear. Were those shawls made by the people originally and then copied by Pendleton, or were those bought and then embellished, or
So
what
those
was
are
the origin?
okay. So those are the wool blankets. So those were all trade blankets that were fringed, and then Pendleton added fringe to theirs later. But one of the things that Jacqueline West did was she went back, and because the factory was closed during COVID. So she's at her house in South Dakota. And so she basically contacted Pendleton, asked them for, because all the stripes every year, you know, they're different, and the colors are different. And so she asked for the 1920s palette of what those colors were, and then the patterns of what those blankets would have been like, the stripes in particular, which is what we wear. You know, at that time, we were known for that. And so she went ahead and ordered like blanks, and then they custom dyed and then aged a lot of those in-house. But we were having this discussion just the other day, because she was like, how many did we do? And I said, I recall ordering, there were 500 to begin with, and I recall ordering another 350. And then on top of it, there is an antique dealer that has antique, like racing mills and of that were different patterns that some of the men would wear, not the stripes. And then some of the women, there were several background people that would have these kind of prominent blankets on. And these were original from 1920s that the movie that we bought, and I know that she bought maybe, I don't know, probably 50 of those.
Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And I have two questions. One's very short. I'll ask that second. Given the results of the Oscars, do you feel Mr. Scorsese will take it as a challenge to go one step further and maybe get another screenplay in action? And the second question is, can you rename the project you're on now and what platform that's on?
So for the first question, you know, Marty has basically said this is his last masterpiece. You know, he is 81 years old. However, that is a man that knows how to rally. And he works on many things. He works actually on many things besides this. I mean, that is one busy gentleman. And so, you know, I will always hope that he has another screenplay and that he has another movie coming out, because, you know, I want to see more from him. So I'm going to always hold out hope that that happens. For the second part of it, American Primeval will be coming out on Netflix in December.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to know if young people are being encouraged and how they're being encouraged to go into the film industry.
Yes. So, in particular in Oklahoma, one of the phenomenons that happened was, Oklahoma did not have like the tax credit set up similar to how you do in New Mexico. So, when the film industry comes in, they're looking for, I think Georgia has something like 64 million and in Infinite. New Mexico has set itself up for this industry to have more. And when this movie came in to Oklahoma, there were 4 million for any movie that would come in. No competition whatsoever. But Marty wanted to shoot it there. And so what ends up happening is Chad and several people go to visit the Oklahoma Film Commission and the Lieutenant Governor to talk to the state about why the legislation needs to be passed to open up to more tax credits. I think that they were able to get it up to 25 million, and it may be more now when they recognized what was happening. But when you have something like this size of a movie come in, I don't think that anybody who's ever worked with one this big before knows what to do. Like we'd had Twister or something like that. But in particular for this, because those tax credits are basically, it involves 800 people coming to be housed, and it involves, the actors, and the zip codes that you need to have in order to get that, to counter those costs of all of those big budgets. And so it opened up a whole market then in Oklahoma. And so you have wonderful people like Sterling Harjo, who Reservation Dogs, who was able to set and write this script and get together with the right people and have this wonderful story, come to light and have all of us out there, really watching it and following it. If anybody hasn't seen Reservation Dogs, you need to get Hulu and watch it. Sorry, Apple, because I love you, but Hulu has that one. But anyway, do, because it's a great story and a great TV series. And then, Lily just got Erica Tremblay's Fancy Dance, which was shot in Oklahoma, and those tax credits count then. But you have to look at the business part of why these streaming companies and why these different movie entities would come in and actually shoot somewhere, and that's a big counterbalance to what happens. But the reality is, once Fancy Dance was shot, it couldn't get distribution, and Lily worked with Apple, and Apple is now distributing that because of her help getting Erica Tremblay in front of them to be able to push this through. So there are definitely things that we're going to have to work on, again, as Native people, with our allies, to be able to get to the right places to get our stories distributed and get our narratives out there. But that's encouraging more and more Natives. The one thing I really love to say that happened with this movie, because that was a pretty tall wall, a huge wall, thick, that Natives could not get up, over, or through. We couldn't do it because we weren't, the industry doesn't look at us like they do other geographic, money-making areas of having the population to be able to, like The Color Purple or, a Latino movie. I mean, even when you look within the voting system of who, in elections, people are trying to woo and, to bring in to be voters. It's the same in any business type of, what's going to make the money. Well, the thing I think is most interesting is Marty was the hammer. He's actually, I call him a striking axe. My family is strike axe. That's the line that I come from. And he is a striking axe because we don't have in our language the word for hammer. And he knocked a hole through that wall so big and took us to some place that nobody had been to make history with us, all of us. That now we as Native people have a place to go through. We have a voice. We have a building block to stand on and a foundation. You know, we have people to go to. We have people that are sympathetic like Apple to sit down and listen to us, and Netflix. We have a place to get through and go now. It's really in the game with everybody else. And so I say again, it is going to be up to us to sit down and get those stories out, get to the right people, start talking, start networking, start getting into this industry, and start getting us out there, because we have a place. We've now done it one time. And we have many, many, many more times to go.
Ubiak Gindi Kuntavoha, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. So you touched on Fancy Dance, Res Dogs as two really great films. I actually personally love them and shows. I just wanted to wonder what other recommendations of films or TV series that are indigenous that you would recommend on watching?
Oh my golly, you're going to stump me. Then I'm going to make friends mad if I don't say them. Let's see. You know, I'm drawing a blank. I hate to tell you that. I am. I'm friends with Kaiba Gordon, you know, and I would definitely say, I mean, just because I want to promote him wherever he goes, because, you know, he's really out there and has been out there a long time really trying to tell our stories. You know, and some of them, because we have so few indigenous stories that are distributed on this level, that are out there. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Help me, Marita.
One that comes to mind right now that won some awards at Sundance is Julian Braveheart. Julian
Yeah, you're right.
Braveheart?
Mm-hmm.
Brave Noise Cat, yeah, on the boarding schools. And I know Ed Archie Noise Cat is in that film too, and he's a Native American artist. He's shown here during Indian Market. So that would be an amazing thing to have it screened here in Santa Fe. So who knows? But yeah, I think that that's one to really look for when that gets released and out there. I don't know what happens after Sundance with those films, but I know that that was something that happened recently and something to look forward to. Sugar cane, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I don't know why I went blank, but I did.
Well, I think that wraps up our afternoon today. I do need to say it's been great being a friend with Julie over the years and hearing the projects that she's working on and all the different things. And when she first started talking about this movie, it was Martin Scorsese and Mr. DiCaprio. And then later on, when she came back to Santa Fe and we had dinner, she'd be like, well, Marty and Leo. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, you know. So yeah, it was great. It was really great. Let's see. Thank you again for being here. Our next event is going to be Saturday, April 13th, with Regis Pecos from Coche de Pueblo, Alvin Warren from Santa Clara Pueblo, and Brian Valle from Acoma Pueblo. The discussion will be about tribal governance, sovereignty, and Pueblo culture. So please mark that on your calendar. And also, again, I want to thank Maria and Edward Gale and the Gale Family Foundation for their support for the speaker series. And if you have any inkling to give to the Education Department or to the museum, please contact the Museum of New Mexico Foundation. And right now, we have some Pueblo cookies and outside with some Indian tea. So please join us. And again, thank you. And thank you, Julie, for being here.
And thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you.